I'd like to thank you again for joining me for the Printer Basics series. Today we're going to talk about imaging, and in particularly the toner cartridge or toner developer drum assembly. Every printer, again, different by brand, different by manufacturer. Some companies all one cartridge, some companies individual pieces. So first, let's do a little quick primer on what we're actually talking about. And move these things around. So this is the imaging process. Basically, there's the imaging drum, a developing roller, they call it a charging roller. It could be any kind of charging device, a corona wire or whatever. There's a cleaning blade that cleans the drum, and a transfer roller that transfers the image from the drum to the paper. All of this, regardless if we're talking black or white or color, is roughly the same. Only difference being, if there's color, this part is duplicated 3 times in addition to the black. So you'll have 4 sets entirely. So black, cyan, magenta, yellow. All of these devices use the high voltage power supply to make the static charge to move the toner particulate around. And toner's some evil stuff if you get it around enough. So we're going to try to keep this dust to a minimum today. So these are out of a Kyocera. This device is the drum assembly. And if we look, I'll flip it over. Just so you know, you're damaging a drum by leaving it in light. So you never want to just leave these out like this, but this drum is already trashed, so we're not worried about it. But this is the imaging drum. Different manufacturers are going to make this different colors. I know a lot of the HP stuff tends to be a green or a blue color. The Kyocera stuff tends to be black a lot. I think the Samsung stuff does as well. The color is really not important. This is what they call a photosensitive emulsion. Basically, you're going to charge it with high voltage. It'll get a static charge. Then when the laser hits it, it'll expose the drum material, and it'll lose its charge where it's exposed, thus picking up the toner. On this one, if we look, if I can lift it out, let's see. Yep. On this unit, this roller is the charge roller for this printer. So the high voltage charge is brought across this unit. I don't see the contact spring, so it must be in the casing. But this is where the high voltage charge comes from. It's put on this roller, then transferred to this roller. In contrast, if we look at a Lexmark, these are out of Lexmarks. These are Lexmark's charge rollers, and these drop down as a separate assembly, and they make their contact through this bronze connection to the high voltage power supply. And these are the charge rollers that charge the imaging drum on a Lexmark. This is the one in the Kyocera. HP cartridges tend to be self-contained, so you can't take the charging components out. It's just part of the cartridge. And you'll find that with some vendors, is that all these components are actually inside the disposable part of the cartridge. This particular assembly, it's all separate, so we can easily see the cartridge itself. So we have the development drum. Well, we have the imaging drum. This is the developing roller. This actually is covered in toner particulate. So all of this is toner particles. And if you smear it, you can see it's just dust. This is all the toner that is inside this developer, which is fed from the toner cartridge. So sometimes, like in this case, your imaging problem can start here. You see there's this blank spot. This developer has some kind of obstruction, probably packed in toner, that is preventing it from evenly coating this roller to evenly coat the imaging roller or print drum. But this unit basically I'm going to mess this all up as I'm already. Oh, no, we got it. Snaps in here, and if you see these rollers are almost touching, I think they might actually be touching on this model. It varies. Some people count there's enough static charge for it to just leap over, but but on this one, development cartridge goes next to the drum unit, and the actual toner cartridge sits on top. And there's a door, and the toner just dumps in there. So when you on a Kyocera you'll install a toner, it'll say loading. What it's actually doing is pumping toner out of the toner cartridge and depositing it into this hole in the development unit, and that will coat the roller. So as the imaging drum rotates, it takes its toner up, and on the bottom it deposits the toner. I don't know who's going to see this. Let me pop this back out. I've done a bad thing. I snapped it in. There we go. Take that back out. So as it loads this print drum, on the bottom the paper would cross across this at the bottom like that, and there'd be a transfer roller, and it would take the toner and pull it onto the paper, and the paper would go get fused. Show you that. Let me show you that now. So what we've looked at, we have the print drum, which is this device. You guys all see that okay? It moves up a bit. I think we're square on that. So we have the print drum, which is this device. The development roller, which is inside the developer unit. And then not shown in this picture, but on top, well, it's shown as the dotted line, is the toner cartridge itself, which is where the toner is housed. The primary charging roller, which in this case is on top of the developer, or if you're in Lexmark, is a separate entity. And the transfer roller, which we'll cover in another video. So far, you get your paper. Well, paper from your input source, that would be your pickup assembly, which we talked about earlier, or paper input unit. So input source they're referring to as the tray. Paper input unit is the pickup assembly we showed. Registration assembly, which I don't think I'm going to have for a video for you guys. I'll have to look around if I have a spare. But basically it just squares the page, because if it picks, sometimes it gets a little angle on it. That goes through underneath the print drum, which is this assembly, where the transfer roller and static charge pulls the toner particles off the drum and onto the roller. And that gets fused. And then if you're duplexing, you divert it, and that will go back around again, get re-put through the paper input, and get reprinted on the other side, fused again, then it goes to the output. I can also show you the cleaning blade, because I can see it on this model. I'll put you into this camera over here. Yeah, you can see it. That yellowish rubbery bit, that's the cleaning blade. It's like a rubber squeegee, and it just knocks off extra toner. And I believe on these printers, I don't know if it's on here or not. It may not be. Some of these printers have a waste toner bottle that toner falls into, and some of them it just stays in the drum for the life of the drum, and that might be the case here. So this may actually be full of waste toner. I'm not going to take that apart to find out, because that could just be a terrible mess. So basically, when you're talking imaging systems in the laser world, a lot of your odd imaging problems are going to be produced by the imaging component here. If it's not a fusing problem, so you're not seeing wrinkling of the paper or weird tears or anything really happening to the paper, your problem is here somewhere. And if you give me a minute, I will grab a paper on all the problems. I'd like to thank IPS, because they have the laser guide. You can look these up. It's basically laser quality print defect guides. And if you look, in the case of this one, we had this problem. We had light print, where toner wasn't being delivered, so part of the text was just light. In our case, it had nothing to do with the way the toner was installed, just something was wrong with the development unit. You can get a case where you run out of toner almost entirely and the whole page is light. That would be this problem here. And speckling. I've had this happen. This is usually when a toner cartridge breaks. A lot of the times, if it's something like a little odd toner came out, you can print a couple pages and this will resolve itself. If it doesn't, open your printer and you can carefully lift the cartridge out and see if there's toner everywhere. If there is, put your cartridge back in and call a printer tech, because we got vacuums and we have methods. We'll get this cleaned out of your printer. Replace your toner cartridge, you're usually good. Typically it doesn't kill too much equipment. Same thing, you can get specks on the backside. That's usually dirty inside the printer. Typically if a cartridge leaks and you change it, there's toner laying in the bottom of the printer path, which the paper doesn't necessarily touch, but it gets close to as it comes by. So as the page goes by, little bits of toner get picked up on the back of it and they stick and then they get fused to the page. Then they talk about dropouts, which is basically something's getting lifted off the page. This is typically a problem with the fuser. If you see stuff like that, that's usually a fuser issue. You see, you got images and it looks like it's been tore off the paper, but the paper's not too bad. Fuser. Sometimes cheap paper will give you that same problem. You get the lines. This is another cartridge issue. It's typically, when you see lines, always check this drum. If you see scratches going around, because you'll actually be able to see, like, I don't know if you can tell here, there's like a white mark. Sometimes those are scratches, and I think that's dust. But sometimes you'll actually see a scratch that you can visually see, and that is going to make a constant print defect. And it's going to be a line. Loose toner, this is not actually an imaging problem, it's a fusing problem. That just means your fuser did not get hot enough to fuse the toner to the paper. Fuser problem. Almost always. I don't think I've ever had it be anything else. So, fuser problem, 100% of the time. Repeating defects. These will drive you crazy. But basically, there's something wrong on the roller, and as it rolls around, it keeps putting the same dot on the page. Sometimes it's a fuser, sometimes it's a development roller. The cool part is if you get your service manual, and this is not, it's not the same for every printer. Hang on, it's in here, I saw it. This is a repetitive defect ruler. So basically, your first occurrence of the defect is here, and then each one of these lines represents the roundness of the circumference of the roller and how far you'll get down the page. So say you have a defect here, that same defect occurs right there, print cartridge. And this happens to be on some HP printer because they all kind of look like this. You can get books of these for every printer, or most printers, or if you get your particular service manual, these will be inside. So again, like you see, oh, defect is here, so well, I'm not on the right way. So you got a little smudge here, that same smudge shows up on 4. I like how it keeps coming with print cartridge, because 2, 4, and 5 are print cartridges. They're saying 3 is a transfer roller issue, because transfer rollers are typically smaller. 5 is print cartridge, 6 is a fuser, 7 is a print cartridge. When you get into issues like this, where it's like 6 and 7 are next to each other, this is the fuser, that's the print cartridge. So imaging drum, fuser. This is when you take the 2 out and just look at them. Typically you can find the defect on the roller. But this is something you get with experience. A regular seasoned technician could spot these and go, oh, that's a this or that's a that. If I see a print defect that's repetitive, I will check not only the part where I think it is, but I will check the other parts in the printer just to be sure I'm not looking at multiple issues or something else is worn, because I've had instances where a staple has went through a printer and it caused only one defect, but it damaged the toner, it damaged the transfer roller, and it damaged the fuser. It was one folded staple had gotten dropped into the unit. It happened. So picking back up, let's see, we got lines, loose toners. Yeah, lines, we have lines. Obviously that's with cartridge defects. of any variety, loose toners not fusing, repeated defects from the sheet. Gray background. This is typically... This can actually be a lot of things. It can be bad paper, it can be high voltage problems, it can be development problems, it can be density settings. There's a lot to play with here. When you get a problem like this, you gotta take a minute and kind of go through what's going on. Typically with things like this, if I see a gray background problem, first thing I'm going to do before I do anything else is print an internal test page. I'm going to print a configuration sheet, a network setup page. Basically, I'm going to print something from inside the printer that the computer is not involved in to make sure it's not a document file problem, a copy problem. I want to make sure it is in fact a print engine problem, which is the printer itself. Let's see. Then I'm going to check density settings, make sure no one turned density to, because you can adjust how much toner the printer lays. Make sure they didn't set it to like 10 or the maximum it can be. If that's the case, I'm going to return it to the default setting. If that doesn't work, then I'll replace a print cartridge. And then if I can't correct it then I'll start looking into like high voltage issues or control problems. Toner smears. This can get kind of ugly. Sometimes it's a failure to fuse. Sometimes something inside the printer is rubbing on it, like there's brushes in some printers that can smear. This can be a motor drive problem if you're getting, depending on the way it smears. What are they calling for toner smears? They did not cover what toner smears are for. Huh. You see? But this is typically some kind of cartridge issue. Repeating images, again, same as repeating defects. This is typically a print cartridge issue. Sometimes this is a fuser issue. You'll see it. Lift it, set it, lift it, set it. You'll see this if the fuser roller wears out. Page skew is a registration assembly issue. If the page goes in and the registration assembly doesn't square it, the page will be kind of wonky. You want to make sure there's nothing in the printer path that's catching it and pulling it. Curler wave. This is problems with your paper. Cheap paper, moist paper, overly dry paper, old paper. It happens. Paper is a tree. It was alive. It's still kind of alive. It has a mind of its own sometimes. Wrinkles. Always a fuser problem. Almost always. This is almost always a problem from the fuser. It's very rarely anything else, but sometimes, but mostly. You see this, first thing you check fuser. Save yourself a lot of grief. Misformed characters. This is a motor drive problem a lot of the times. I have seen this on printers that the gears have been wearing, so they won't drive at exactly the right speed. A motor slows down, a gear skips a tooth, so you'll get weird compression. This can also be issues with the way it scans, but if it's a print issue straight, sometimes this is a maintenance issue, sometimes it's gearing worn out. Black and white lines like this, these are basically, they're white lines of missing. You'll usually have printed text and you'll see white missing lines. Development problems that aren't getting fed. This is a lot of times just a cartridge issue. Tire tracks. This is another just a repetitive defect. It's just there's a lot of them on the fuser. Not the fuser, on the... This is the repetitive defect. There's a lot of them on the imaging drum. Usually it's just a print cartridge issue. If you have an issue. White spots on black. This is sometimes not enough feet of toner or not enough high enough density. And sometimes it can just be an artifact of printing. I've had this just as a software issue. It just didn't... The way they were sending the data to the printer wasn't of a high enough resolution, so black wasn't black. The printer was interpreting some spots as white. I've had that happen. Scattered lines. This happens sometimes. This is just as stuff wears out. You can sometimes cheat. There's options to optimize lines in your printer. But a lot of these are going to be cartridge related, drum related. But continuing on wise, basically if you see a print defect, check your drum on these units if you can separate it. Check your developer. As you see here, we weren't getting a feed, so this was actually ending up being an unprinted stripe down every page. And if you get something like this on a cartridge, especially on cheaper printers like your 4000 series, your older stuff, your little 1000s, your little office printers that use a small cartridge, the trick is take the cartridge back and forth a couple times, run 10 or 15 sheets, see if it corrects itself. Because what happens is, some printers, the toner is just kind of sitting in there, and sometimes you'll end up with it clumping to one side or clumping to another and not being in a spot. So the roller will turn, but there'll be no toner there to feed it. If you shake it gently, because if you shake it real hard, toner's coming out. Shake it gently, that way you'll get your toner even. And that's ultimately what you want, is even toner distribution inside your development unit or inside your toner cartridge if you have an HP where it's all one monolithic piece. And then if you have a cartridge like this out, take a piece of paper and cover the drum area, or a couple if you have to, depending on how it sits. Just cover it up so the light doesn't touch it directly. I always like to leave any print cartridges on a piece of plastic, only because they tend to leak. They leave little marks, and you don't want to leave a mess at a customer site. So if you got a bag, sit them on a bag. I recommend that if you're doing this stuff professionally, or even if you're not, get yourself some like white kitchen garbage bags or black kitchen garbage bags, the little ones. So when you take a cartridge out, you put it, that way it doesn't spill, doesn't make a mess, and it's protected from the light. Because the manufacturer will ship it in a bag for a reason, and they ship it in a bag to protect it, and also to protect you from it. They ship cartridge covers. If you take these out, like this was removed, these are damaged. So when I take them out, if the manufacturer gives me a cover, I'm going to recover whatever they gave me the covers for. Just like with this, I have the papers that's summarily lost. I have the paper the manufacturer shipped it in. So in this case, when you get your new one, the manufacturer is kind enough to put it in paper. And this paper, as you see, is just black construction paper to protect the drum. And they put it here and like that. And they typically will tape this up. On disposable stuff, I'm not worried about it, but at least when I wrap it up, I'm keeping it clean. For one, is if my new one is defective and this one was in better shape than the defective one, because I have to ship it back, I don't want to damage this until I know I don't need it. And then at which point I don't care to throw it away. Like on this one, this is considered a lifetime drum unit, unless something goes wrong with it. I forget this. I'm pretty sure this is a lifetime drum unit if anything doesn't go wrong with it. Because it has optical sensors and control boards and wiring harness, and this is a very expensive piece of gear right here. Typically they say you keep the drum forever, you replace the developers, you replace the toners, everything's hunky-dory. That's all there is to this part of the imaging process. The next time we will talk about transfer rollers and transfer belts for color, and how those work and what they do.